A warm welcome to everyone joining us. This will be the last session under the Governance Forum. Before we formally open this session, let us begin with a few house rules. First, if you haven't already changed your login title to your name and organization, you may do so now by clicking the participants icon and choosing Rename. Second, please ensure that your microphone is on mute until you are selected by the moderator to participate. Third, if you would like to contribute to the discussion, questions and comments can be raised in the chat box, or you may click on the participants icon and select Raise Hand. Please select Lower Hand once you have spoken. Please keep questions short and straightforward to allow more questions from other participants. Fourth, Chinese and Russian channels are available. Participants may opt for their language of preference by clicking on the interpretation icon below their screens. English may be a second language for some of our participants, so we promote the use of slow, clear, and simple communication. We ask that participants and speakers avoid jargon and acronyms, enunciate properly, and practice inclusive language as much as possible. We will have to emphasize that, based on experience, abbreviations can be quite challenging for live translations, so best to avoid them. And if we truly cannot, kindly slow down so that our translators can provide accurate and good quality interpretations. And fifth, in order to ensure that the event can commence on time and take place without any disruptions, all participants and speakers are requested to respect the schedule. Should speakers exceed their speaking time, they can expect a gentle prompt from our moderator. And finally, if you experience any technical problems, please let me or any member of the Governance Secretariat know, and we will attend to you as best as we can. Thank you very much, and I now turn you over to our moderator.
Thank you so much, Ali. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Rachana Srestha, a public management specialist at ADB, and I'm the moderator for the session on multi-level governance system and localizing SDGs. We have today Lu Shen, Director, Resource Management and Aid Effectiveness Division, Strategic Partnership Division of ADB, who will set the context and share with us ADB's alignment with the 2030 agenda. Presentation by Lu will be followed by Ms. Emilia Sais, Secretary General of the United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG. Ms. Emilia will share with us some of the transformative actions in multi-level governance systems to achieve the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. We have two discussants on the panel. Dr. Joy Ellerman, Director General of Kerala Institute of Local Administration. Dr. Ellerman will share with us the efforts and experience in driving localizing SDGs agenda in Kerala, which is one of the states in India. Our other discussant is Patrick Duong. He's Regional Advisor and Lead Governance and SDG Localization from UNDP Hub for Asia and the Pacific. Mr. Duong will focus on the importance of innovation and multi-stakeholder platforms to accelerate SDG localization. We will conclude our session and our 2 days governance forum with the concluding remarks by Bruno Carrasco, Director General and concurrently Chief Compliance Officer of the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of ADB. I now would like to call upon Ms. Lu Shen for her presentation. Ms. Shen has over 20 years of experience and brings extensive development work, not only from ADB, but from various UN organizations and multilateral development banks covering sovereign and non-sovereign operations in Asia. In her current position, Ms. Shen is responsible to ensure ADB's alignment with the SDGs and coordinate the implementation of ADB's commitments on aid and development effectively. Ms. Shen?
Hi, everybody hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Yeah, my internet is pretty dodgy today, so I will be keeping my video off, but thank you very much for the introduction. So yeah, as Rachana has just mentioned, I'm here to set the stage. And as you may know, Strategy, Policy and Partnerships Department at ADB, where I sit, serves as the institutional focal point for the SDGs. And so today, what I will do is provide you with a bit of a context of the SDG progress, and then I will dive into more detail about ADB's thinking and activities on the SDGs. Next slide. As you can see from the slide, the Asia Pacific region has already been off track to achieve the SDGs. And this is well before the COVID crisis. What is most glaring is the actual backsliding of some SDGs, such as climate action, as well as life below water. Next slide. And so you can imagine that the COVID-19 pandemic has set the SDG progress further off track. I think the first thing I wanted to mention is to acknowledge that the crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic is linked to the existing gaps that we have in achieving some of the SDGs, namely SDG 1 and 10, which tracks the gap in social protection systems. SDG 2, that tracks our progress towards zero hunger. SDG 3, universal healthcare and communicable diseases. So this slide provides a closer look at the ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic has further exacerbated the progress towards SDGs. Starting from the first row, we have economic growth in the region that has contracted for the first time in more than 60 years. And by analysis, millions of people are estimated to be pushed back under poverty line or into near poverty. Second, women's economic empowerment has been further threatened by the pandemic, with many estimates suggesting that they are at higher risk of being pushed back into poverty, given that they have already less participation in the formal economy and borne a higher share of the burden of unpaid care. In the second row, the COVID-19 has reversed migration trends. So this is pushing people back into rural areas where access to basic services is much weaker. In the region where 28% of children were already stunted before the pandemic, this is an indicator of the prevalent food insecurity challenges that we have in the region. And we can only say that the COVID-19 pandemic has added to these challenges. Next, environmental issues remain pressing in the region. And despite severe economic contraction, the greenhouse gas emissions have estimated to have reduced by less than 7% in 2020. And then there are more than 5,000 deaths that were attributed to natural disasters in the region and adding to the toll of the pandemic. Lastly, cities in many ways have been at the front line of the pandemic, where the crowded conditions and the lack of access to services have all made it very difficult to contain the transmission of COVID-19. Next slide. To date, many of our DMCs or development member countries have embarked on this journey of reaching the SDGs. But as you can see from the slide, much remains to be done. Some of the key aspects, one is 36 out of our 41 DMCs in the region have conducted voluntary national reviews at least once. 12 of these 36 DMCs have actually repeated this exercise to track progress. 16 of the 41 DMCs have established laws or decrees in the context of the SDGs. 23 DMCs have implemented SDG coordination mechanisms. And finally, more than 30 DMCs are integrating SDG targets and indicators in their national development plans. Next slide. So this is a really interesting slide because it really demonstrates the importance of domestic resources of finance, both domestic public as well as domestic private. They represent the largest available pools of finance for development. And it is really key to find ways to harness and steer these forces towards realizing the SDGs. ADB, and you can barely see it, but we belong as part of international public finance. And this is the green sliver that's between the yellow and the orange the bands. And so this really reinforces a role that, this really reinforces the idea that ADB should and ought to play a role where we are the catalyst to bring along more substantial and more available domestic resources. And so this is quite a telling slide. Next slide. So going into how ADB actually supports the SDGs, I think one of the things that's very important to us is the Strategy 2030, which is kind of the guiding document for us as an institution, states that ADB's operations will be designed to help development member countries meet the SDGs. ADB's response aims to support national efforts through programs and interventions which enable accelerated attainment of the SDGs. And we also engage in regional and global policy processes. We have been supporting the SDGs in various forms, including direct financing for SDG aligned programs. We also work with our partner governments to mobilize financing needed to achieve the SDGs. We support knowledge, capacity, and policy dialogue that will help countries to achieve the SDGs. And lastly, but very importantly, we form partnerships with government, with UN agencies, with civil society, as well as the private sector to advance the SDGs. Next slide. As you can see from the slide, this is, we actually are the first MDB to link our projects to the SDGs in our official classification systems. Projects can map to multiple SDGs, and we track these links at target level. We distinguish between our contribution to sector-based goals and cross-cutting thematic goals. So the figures on this slide shows you the breakdown of this alignment for our 2020 project approvals. Unsurprisingly, infrastructure, clean energy, and water are some of the main contributors to this portfolio. But more importantly, to help our DMCs at the upstream, where we have also made a conscious effort to link national SDG priorities to our country partnership strategies, as well as provide targeted TA and loan resources to that end. Next slide. So our longstanding regional collaboration with SCAP and UNDP to support regional progress on the SDGs, it's a very important example of our partnerships for knowledge and policy dialogue. And this has been very, very highly valued by ADB as an institution. Through this partnership, we have jointly invested in making data on SDG progress in our region available. We have been supporting dialogue on SDG implementation and progress with diverse stakeholders, and we have been providing a regional perspective on the challenges and opportunities to make progress on the agenda. Since 2020, our joint partnership with our partners have focused on the linkages between COVID recovery and SDG attainment. Next slide. We recently published reports on our contributions to the SDGs, one focusing on ADB's own contributions, and the second one in close collaboration with a group of 12 MDBs as well as the IMF. We encourage you to look at these reports for a more detailed explanation and illustration of our approach to supporting countries to implement SDG goals. As I've noted in the beginning, the department where I sit serves as the institutional focal point for the SDGs. And to that end, earlier this year, we have launched a new regional technical assistance program to support assessment of national SDG implementation, as well as financing opportunities in the post-COVID context. Initial work will focus in Sri Lanka, Laos, and Mongolia as our priority countries, but our intent is to work in all ADBs. Development member countries. And the goal is to support knowledge and capacity building work and to ensure that our country partnership strategies strongly reflect how they will support SDG attainment. We're very, very happy to be working with Haranya and his team, Rachana and other colleagues in SDCC on their efforts to support subnational efforts to act on the SDG by local government and cities. With this, thank you for your attention. I will pass the floor back to Rachana.
Thank you so much, Lou. You're right on time. Actually, I forgot to tell you at 10 minutes and you actually finished 1 minute before the time. So thanks a lot for that. So with this context, this is, very important to have this context. So thanks, Lou, again for this context. Now, let me now invite Ms. Amelia Saiz for her presentation. Ms. Saiz is jurist by profession and has devoted her professional life to promoting the role of local governments in development as well as fostering relations between cities and their associations worldwide. She started her journey as local government international advocate in the founding organization of UCLG, IULA in 1997. She played a critical role in setting up the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments and has followed and represented local and regional governments in iconic international processes such as the Rio and Beijing +20, as well as the climate agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, and Habitat Third. Her mission as the Secretary General of UCLG started in 2018. When asked about her priorities for coming years, Amelia mentioned that ensuring that the global agendas are built from local priorities and that international action of local governments is understood as an indispensable role to fulfill local needs with solidarity, justice, and accountability at the center. So with this introduction, I would now like to invite Ms. Saiz for a presentation. Over to you, Ms. Saiz.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for that very kind introduction. Sorry. I really liked the way that the previous speaker, that Lou, introduced the context, and I very much identify with her assessment of where we are and the difficulties that we are facing with the Sustainable Development Goals. On a little bit of a happier note, because I do agree that the challenges are really great. I think it's really important that in this context of universal crisis of pandemics, we are still looking at the Sustainable Development Goals as a very valid framework that we need to be mindful of and that we need to take care of. And this is why I am so pleased to be here with you in the Governance Forum, and that you are looking also at the local perspective on the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals for us. For the local and regional government representatives that are gathered in United Cities and local governments, this is extremely critical. The 2030 agenda is still a very clear target for us, and the framework provided by the Sustainable Development Goals is very valid. And within that framework, and you can go now to the next slide, we think that multi-level governance is critical. So we have now the context of the difficulties that we're going to be facing achieving the SDGs. And let us give you the perspective of local and regional governments within the pandemic. The constituency that I represent here has realized that the pandemic has created a new situation, a situation of complex emergencies. That is, emergencies that are long-term emergencies, that are universal emergencies, that touch upon different spheres of government and different aspects of governance. And our constituency has realized, look, our cities, our territories will never be the same. There are some basic issues that we will need to guarantee to ensure that the sacrifices we are asking from this generation and from the next generation, because we are paying it up with their wealth, these transformations, they need to be useful. They need to help us and contribute to a sustainable planet. And we have encapsulated this in a decalogue, and you see 8 of the key issues that we think we need to cover there. Public service provision has proven to be extremely important in this crisis, but it will be in any other crisis. Financial support packages and financial sustainability will be critical for any sphere of government, so we need to ensure those. And this is related to the investment flows and the capital flows that Lou was referring to. Consumption and production will need to be transformed. Those models will need to be transformed, and we argue it needs to be transformed from the bottom up so that we can really maintain the change that we are promoting. They need to be driven around a Green Deal, so the principles of sustainability will be key. We will need to rethink citizenship from a different perspective beyond borders. Human mobility is going to become the next big issue because of the climate change emergency, but also because of other shifts that the current crises are going to put in motion. Health issues are not stopping with COVID. We will see more coming up. We will need equality to have to play a different role in our governance models, and we will need to protect public providers if we want all of these to have an effect. Public service provision and the public service providers cannot be detached from one another and need to play a greater role in governance. And finally, culture, which we see as a fourth pillar of development, will need to also play a very big role in how we perceive governance. So in addition to the framework of the SDGs, these are some of the critical issues that we see underpinning any governance renewal to achieve the SDGs. So let us now go to where we are in the context of SDGs and how local and regional governments are being considered in the 2030 agenda. It is undeniable that a lot of the objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals will need to be triggered by local action, by local service provision. In fact, some academic studies argue that 65% of the targets are related to local action and local service provision. And this is why our movement and our organization in particular has put localization at the heart of our activity. And we are monitoring every year through a global report that we produce together with other 27 organizations of local and regional governments led by my own, by UCLG within the Global Task Force. We monitor how this is happening. And what we have noticed is that there is an increase in the participation of local governments in the preparation of the voluntary national reviews. We still see that that there are areas of the world where the preparation of the voluntary national reviews have are less influence or have less contributions from the local level, and Asia is one of those areas where the contributions are around 33%, with significant changes coming up, but still under the average that we see in other parts of the world. Still, the participation is great, and if we go to the next slide, we see how there are increasing a number of mechanisms that are put in place to allow for coordination. Local and national governments coordination, and this is really important. It is around the 55% in areas like Europe, 26% in Latin America, 24% in Africa, and Asia Pacific is around 20%. This This kind of coordination mechanisms is, from our perspective, the key to the kind of multi-level governance that we need, triggering the implementation of subsidiarity, so putting the competencies in the hands of the level of governance that is closest to the problems that need to be solved, and to the beneficiaries of those services. So this is not a good picture yet for what we want to achieve, but evolution is coming up there. If we go to the next slide, what we want to show you here, and I know it's difficult to see, but just look at the colors. What you see in pink is the amount of voluntary local reviews that we have now. So those are voluntary initiatives by local governments monitoring how they are achieving the SDGs in a single city. So there are many around the world that are doing this, but for us, even most importantly, is blue, and that is 14 countries in the world have done an exercise with us for voluntary subnational reviews. All countries, whole of country monitoring of the SDGs. And for us, this is very critical because those voluntary subnational reviews are contributing directly to the voluntary national reviews that are presented at the high level political forum. And they are actually not only influencing how we are reporting on the SDGs, but also about the policies that we'll put in place in the future, and also about the funding that will be directly, we hope, to the service provision, local service provision, which for us is critical for the achievement. So all of this monitoring we are doing yearly, and we are trying to get more and more countries to join. The voluntary subnational reviews are driven by the local government associations, the national local government associations generally, and they establish an interlocution channel between the local and the national government, which we think is a very interesting model for the region, for Asia Pacific as well, and that we hope that that institutions like ADB can also promote, because it will also guarantee creating the type of pipeline that you need for investment, and it will trigger the kind of governance transformation that we are all hoping for. We are convinced of this. So keep monitoring this closely. Now let us go to the next slide, and let us talk now about governance. The special thing about the situation that we have right now with governance is that we are governing in a kind of emergency situation, in an emergency mode, that is triggered by the amount of crises that we have. We don't only have one single crisis. Complex crises are piling up on each other. We have the climate emergency, we have the health emergency, we also have of course, the social emergency that is being triggered by the other two. And this complexity are also much faster. They are in an acceleration mode that necessitates of very flexible frameworks of action, and a level of how will I call it, coordination and interlocution between the different spheres of government that is unprecedented. Well, we feel that our legislative frameworks are not ready for this kind of complexity. There will need to be changes in the future, and we will need to go beyond the frameworks of decentralization that we know. It is not only about the decentralization that we have, so the competencies that the different spheres have, but about the capacity to talk with each other. And this is something that we are studying together with the London School of Economics, UCLG, and our section for big cities, metropolis. We are studying these processes in what we call the emergency governance mechanisms, and one of the key conclusions that we have is The changes that we need will not only need to look at which spheres deals with what, which was the subsidiarity up until now, but about creating mechanisms that allows those spheres of government to have a very flexible and fast way of interlocution, so they can shift priorities in the context of these complex emergencies, which have another special a characteristic, and that is that they are universal, and we were not used to this. At least our perception was not there. But like Lou was saying, the kind of gaps that we find are gaps that we knew existed. They are not new things. They are just magnified right now. So these things that you see here are some of the issues that are very critical to tackle in any framework that we will need to develop in the future. So emergency governance, actually, this kind of governance that we propose, where multi-level governance is critical, requires governments to be in the driver's seat. It needs responses to be flexible, and they need to build on legitimacy and trust of governments, all levels of governments, as accepted conveners by the constituency, by the citizens, and the issue of trust here will be extremely important, because the measures that governments will need to put forward are very tough, and we are experiencing how populations are now questioning decisions in different parts of the world. We feel that if you have a better coordination and interlocution between the different spheres of government, you will be able to rebuild trust. A second key recommendation that we have for the type of multi-level governance that we need is to promote a stable public institutions as well, with a core mandates, but flexible ways of going about recommendation and being able to shift priorities quickly. We will need to support the capacity building to ensure governments at all levels that they have the ability to take the lead. And I think ADB and other development actors will need to play a very critical role here if we want to succeed. If we go to the next slide, we will see that, and I know it's difficult to see there, but you will see that 31% of the cities and regions that we have interviewed say that they had to stop or cancel capital investments that were happening in this emergency. But 38% says, well, they were not affected. These capital investment were not so affected. And 31% says, well, these things were stopped, but they were temporarily stopped. What we have seen, however, across the board is that the income in taxes, in local taxes, in shared taxes, tariffs and fees, they have all seen a very, very significant decrease. And here is where we have the sustainability problem of public service provision, something also that we hope you can take into account in the work that you are going to be doing in the future. So what are our priorities? And if you go to the next slide, you will see we will need to prioritize certain types of service provision, and the critical key for us here is that local and regional governments will need to have greater responsibilities around health. It's not about healthcare, but about service provision that impacts healthcare, such as cleaning and hygiene, social services to protect those that are most vulnerable. We will also need to see how some of the temporary measures that we have been undertaken will study whether those temporary measures around housing, for instance, around access to food, to education, how we can see whether these can become permanent measures. The use of public transport and how you organize that public transport, but also the organization of public spaces will be very critical as well for the future. And finally, allow me to wrap up by saying that what we think needs to happen now is we will need to acknowledge local service provision as an articulator for all of society and for all of government. And the definition of the competencies and responsibilities will not be able to be done in the traditional manner that they were looked at. We will need to go beyond the formulas of multi-level governance that we knew, and we will need to define new types of mechanisms that allows us to implement new measures. So defining core mechanisms, giving capacity building to all spheres of government, but creating overarching coordination mechanisms will be critical for the future of local service provision. And at the end of the day, for us, multi-level governance aims as ensuring that local service provision is appropriate. We see local service provision now as a very critical factor for the achievement of the 2030 agenda and for sustainability in general. And we hope that we can put this at the right place of the discussion, and that the future voluntary national reviews take this much more into account. So we're very happy that that we are at this dialogue today, and we look forward to working with you in the future for the good of local service provision and all of society and all of government processes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I was frozen for a while. Back now. So many thanks, Ms. Saij, for sharing with us. I took away these 8 issues of that development actors should take into account in the areas of localizing SDGs, and important contributions that local and regional governments could make in accelerating SDGs implementation and improving multi-level governance. It is encouraging to note that local and regional governments are driving forces of innovation, though still lots need to be done and achieved. And I noted that improving legislative framework, strengthening institutional capacity are some of the areas that still needed work. And that, as you mentioned, that gaps already existed have further magnified by the pandemic. So therefore, innovative and transformative actions and not traditional actions are indeed important, are indeed critical for improved local service provisions. And as you said very rightly, I think the local service provisions are indeed very important that would help us achieve the 2030 agenda and sustainability in general. So thank you so much for these very encouraging messages that we take into account. We all need to take into account, and in accelerating the implementation of 2030 agenda, the SDGs, and localizing SDGs. I now would like to call upon Dr. Joy Ellerman to share his views. Dr. Ellerman is a medical doctor, and he also has masters in public health. He was one of the core team members of the People's Plan campaign in Kerala when it was launched in 1996. Besides working in different international organizations in different capacities, Dr. Ellerman has served as National Resource Person of the Ministry of Panchayati Raj India for decentralized participatory planning. He has also served in many committees set up by the Ministry of Panchayati Raj India and the Government of Kerala. Dr. Ellerman was awarded the Outstanding Community Builder Award by UNDP India in 2007. He also served as Vice President of Kerala's People's Science Movement and People's Health Movement. So over to you, Dr. Ellerman.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thanks for this opportunity. I come from the state of Kerala, in India. And the state is a front runner in the pursuit for achieving SDGs. In fact, we have been the first as far as the various indicators are concerned in India. See, the problem is while the goals, indicators, and targets are set at the global, national, and a little bit in state level, subnational levels, actually many of them have to be achieved at the local level. You can just see whichever you take, many of them have to be achieved at the very local level. In fact, here, the state of Kerala had launched a People's Plan campaign 25 years back. This is the 25th year. It's actually about participatory local level planning and budgeting for development. So as part of that, we develop plans under the leadership of the local governments. We have a 3-tier system at the rural level and the 2-tier system, 2-stage system in the urban level. So this is all multi-level decentralized planning, you can say. And in addition, so every year they prepare the annual development plans and budget. And then there is also an overarching 5-year plan, development plan. And in addition, many of the responsibilities are also bestowed upon the local governments, especially with regard to many of the development sectors. Take the case of poverty alleviation, take the case of health, education, irrigation, drinking water, child, and whatnot. You can say, or most of the development sectors are actually transferred to the local governments at various levels. That's very important. We are actually talking about a multi-level planning and governance. So where national government is involved, state government is involved, sub-state, like the district, block, and the village governments are also involved. So, but the thing is, as I said, the SDGs have their goals, indicators, and targets basically developed at the global and national and state levels, whereas we need to actually adapt it to the local situations. So when we talk about localizing SDG, we need to have that flexibility of adapting to the local level, especially in terms of indicators and targets and all. I mean, overall, the goals remain, but various indicators at the local level have to be different. For example, I can tell you, if I take the case of infant mortality rate, for a national or a state or a district level, probably that definition might work about the infants, the child below 1 year of age, the death out of the 1,000 deliveries and all will work. But when you take the case of a local village, you cannot have the denominator of 1,000 and then calculate anything and also monitor it. So this is track it basically. So this means we need to actually rework on the indicators at the local level. So this is the attempt, especially then for us at the People's Development Planning campaign at the local level, where they prepare the local development plans. It has to be results oriented, considering the sustainable development goals, an overarching one, and then indicators have to be slightly modified, or sometimes it has to be even include more indicators have to be included so that we achieve SDGs. So which means localizing sustainable development goals or development goals to achieve this 2030 agenda. We need to set the goals, targets, also the targets, and then the means of implementation of activities. All these things have to be part of our local development plan. And then the convergence of resources and taking into consideration the needs and the demands of the local population. All these things are part of the local government planning process, and how this planning process can be linked to sustainable development goals, where we need to have an integrated, inclusive, and sustainable development. And at the local development plans actually focus on leave no one behind. So what we have done here is develop a local indicator framework. As I said, this is necessary because we need to adapt, disaggregate certain data to the local level, at the local level and all. And then it is also about various tiers of governments, as I said. So multi-level indicators is even the local indicator framework has to be for multi-level governance structures. And then we also need to bring in all the actors and all. So this local indicator framework, which also provides space for the local governments to adapt and include more indicators and also fix their own targets, taking into consideration what we need to achieve at the global level and the national level. So what we have done also, apart from the local indicator framework, is something called a SDG Training Toolkit, which in fact is all about, it is useful for the planning aspects also. So let me actually show this toolkit. Hope you can see this.
Yes, yes, we can see. Thanks.
So, and I will just show, I won't go into the details of it, but how we do is it's actually a web portal based toolkit, which has a searchable database from local to the state level, which means actually we are actually talking state and national level, so that we are actually talking about a multi-level kind of approach. So this also allows all these local governments to set their own targets. As I said, they can also adapt or change the indicators to suit the definitions which suits the local level. And then this can also be used as a monitoring. So it's actually, though we because I come from an institute called Kerala Institute of Local Administration, where we are mandated to provide capacity building. We do capacity building for local governments. And we started it as a training toolkit, but finally we ended up it as a planning tool for the local governments. They can plan, they can set the targets, they can monitor, and this is applicable to all the functionaries. This can be compared with other local governments. Others can see, the people can see, and then we have provided training. We are trying to provide trainings to all these local governments so that they can use this web-based tool, which also has a dashboard, so they can all use it. And this actually allows people to monitor it regularly. They can set the targets for the 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, up to 2030 or not. It's all up to them to use it. I can just show. So for my local government, finally, the people can see, the local government functionaries can see, and the higher tiers of governments also can see what happens in this particular village with regard to the particular SDG. So, and I'm only showing the goal part of it, but they can also see the indicator part of it, the target part of it, and the status part of it on a regular basis. So this is how it works. So finally, as you can see here, they can actually set their own target here. And they can actually compare it with the national value, the state value, and their own local government target. Say, for example, this particular group might have put national value at 75, but state value is 82. But at the local level, for the next 2 years, they would have set 90 as the target and kind of thing. So this is how they actually start planning. So this helps them to review also. And finally, what we also do is it's not just providing a toolkit or a dashboard or something like that. We also provide capacity, training as part of the capacity building. We have an operation strategy for SDG capacity building, and we have conducted right shops for toolkit development, which is actually a participatory process where the local government functions are also involved, and specific trainings on goal and target setting. And of course, the IEC materials and training modules, toolkits and helpers and other things. Finally, the web-enabled SDGs dashboard. So it's online, people can use it, you can see. So as I said, we have this local indicator framework, which means our national global indicator frameworks is adapted to the local settings at various tiers of local governments. And then to provide help or support, we also have the web-based SDG toolkit with a dashboard, which can be viewed, reviewed by every functionary as well as the general public. So this is how we are trying in Kerala to address the SDG 2030 agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ellerman. You are very much right in time. I was just about to budge, but and that's I didn't have to do that. So it's I really enjoyed the important initiatives, the Kerala has undertaken in localizing SDGs. The SDG dashboard on planning and monitoring and the training toolkits that you shared are very encouraging, and I'm sure that other local governments could learn from your initiatives. And as you said that these resources are available online, I'm sure that they could actually avail these resources to help build their knowledge base and the capacity. So this is really very helpful to learn. And thank you so much again for sharing these. I now would like to call upon Patrick Duong for his views. Mr. Duong leads UNDP's work on local governance and SDG localization in Asia and the Pacific. He is based in Bangkok in the UNDP regional hub that serves 26 countries. He has over 20 years of experience at policy and technical level. He has advised governments in several senior advisory positions in Asia and Africa. He earlier worked with civil society organizations, DFID, and the European Union in Africa, the Middle East, and in the Balkan region. So we have a lot to learn from you, Patrick, so over to you.
Thank you very much, Rachana, and a very good morning, afternoon, evening to colleagues. I see colleagues connecting from Europe down to the Pacific, so it's really good to have you here. It's always a pleasure to reconnect with colleagues and friends to discuss SDG localization. I think we're a group of practitioners here that meet quite often. But what is very interesting to see is that we share, I think, a common vision of the challenges, but also a common vision of the solutions. And the way, the previous speaker, Lou, Emilia, and Joy presented things really reassures us that there is a whole body of knowledge that we can tap and we should continue to share. So I just want to, with this, thank ADB for bringing us together, but also connecting to the different countries and member states, both from ADB and UNDP. Now, let me share my screen. I have only 4 slides to share with you, and I'll run them through. Can you just confirm you have the full screen?
Yes, Patrick, go ahead.
Okay, so I'd like to build a little bit on what the previous speaker mentioned, right? And clearly in this region, we need to accelerate SDG localization if we want, or if we're trying to meet the target. I mean, Emilia and Lou mentioned the whole issues around incomplete decentralization process and reforms processes, issues of functional assignment not being matched with fiscal decentralization. But what really comes across here is really how do we define a new model as well to support, the financing of the SDGs at the subnational level beyond going through the traditional fiscal transfers and traditional private-public partnership. And I think this is something that is very important. And I really like the fact that, the 3 first sessions of ADB conference on governance did address issues of investments, including large-scale investments through loans and other funding mechanisms. But I mean, as all the speakers mentioned, yes, we do have challenges, but I'd like to focus here a little bit on the opportunities that we see. Opportunities that we see also because, the pandemic has really shown us the importance or reminded us of the importance of local government and regional government in the delivery of the services, but also how innovative they can be. And I know that Emilia mentioned this as well in her presentation, how innovative they can be and how they can help drive new forms of engagement, new forms of collaboration, new forms of investment at that subnational level, and maybe also inform the wider national policies in terms of further decentralization, but also in terms of financing and how we partner. I think from a development partner's perspective, we in UNDP since 2017 basically have started to think of to how we needed to reorganize ourselves a little bit, right? If we wanted to address local governance, if we wanted to accelerate the localization of the SDGs, but more importantly, how do we work at that subnational level, shifting away a little bit from linear and vertical projects that respond to very singular issues, but that doesn't necessarily address what Emilia mentioned, the complexity of the shocks and the interconnections of the development issues, right? And this is something that we see at the subnational level. We know that we will not enroll more girls to school just by building schools and providing textbook, but it's the whole ecosystem, the whole socioeconomic ecosystem that we need to address if we want to bring those girls back to school and if we really want to accelerate the SDG localization. So this slide here shows you on the right side, the way we use, all of us, development partners, but also investment banks, how we used to program at the subnational level for the last 50 years, right? One issue at a time in terms of project, very vertical project. We used to work at policy level, at the community level. Our implementing partners were mainly, government stakeholders and the development partners, and the financing mainly from ODA. But this today really calls us to shift from this way of doing things. And I think the SDG since 2015 has really pushed us to think differently at how we can program and invest at the subnational level, connecting development issues together, looking at complexity and interconnections between the different development challenges that are there, using a system approach that really looks at what are the leverage points at the subnational level that will have a multiplier effect on the SDGs, right? So we know, for instance, that, women, of course, is an empowerment, is a leverage point. But, there's also access to water. There's also access to internet, right? So what are those leverage points that are very specific to the territories at the subnational level that will be able to help us have this multiplier effect and have this interconnection between the SDGs? How do we do that? Then something that is important, and I think it's at the title of our session today, it's how do we also bring together the different stakeholders, right? And by different stakeholders, I don't just mean inclusive participation of citizens and people, but also how do we bring in the private sector as a contributor to the SDG localization into a win-win kind of approach, but also, as the previous speaker mentioned, the whole different tiers of government, multi-level governance. So the paradigm is not just between having shifted in the way local governments work and have policy coherence with the other tiers of government, but what is the magic that makes, the local governments, the regional governments, the central, the federal governments talk to each other and build upon each other? And of course, we all know the importance of having a whole of society approach. The question that we're facing, and this will be my last slide, after this one, is how do we then, if we want to localize and accelerate the SDGs, how do we finance those portfolio? We're moving away from projects, we're having territorial portfolio of integrated solutions. How do we finance those portfolio, bringing public finance, private finance, and how do we help de-risk the investments or the loans? But equally important, how do we measure the impact of those portfolio and ensure that they remain compliant with the SDGs, and as Joe mentioned, leave no one behind, which is of course our focus. So in UNDP, for the last 2 years, but it started back in 2018, early 2018, where we had this ASEAN conference on SDG localization, we've started to adopt a new approach to look at how we work with multi-level governments, private sector, and people at that subnational level, not to address local governance from a strengthening approach of institutions, but really to look at a systemic transformation process. So we have developed with the Aguirre Center, which is in Bilbao in Spain, a methodology that uses social innovation, ethnographic, digital, and co-creation tools to bring together different stakeholders at that subnational level, to listen to the narratives, the hidden narratives that are there, and identify the leverage point that I just mentioned before, that we believe we need to action so that they will then lead to a transformation systemic process, right? And this is what we call the deep listening. What we identified also through that process is really the fact that we're moving beyond, we're a practitioner of local governance here, beyond the active participation. Having groups of individuals in a room is not sufficient. We're moving from participation to really co-designing solutions. And I think, the whole of society approach is very important, because what we've seen from COVID is a lot of the solutions and a lot of the resources exist at that subnational level. So how do we capitalize on them? And this is how we design then those portfolio of territorial development that are about integrated solution that brings together, that blends together public and private investment. And this is very important here, colleagues, that we also look at supporting governments, develop those new portfolio of territorial development. And let me here mention the work that we do here in Indonesia at the request of the Ministry of Village, who is basically responsible for fiscal decentralization and grants at the village level. They have asked us to help them design portfolio of integrated development solutions so that they can then invest either public funds, but also help mobilize private sector and also bring in sovereign loans and grant mechanisms from ODA. So this is the kind of work that we do. We do this platform approach now in 4 countries in this region, in Thailand, in Pakistan, and in Indonesia. We will soon be hopefully moving to the Philippines, and I see some colleagues from Fiji as well. And this initiative that we're doing is now basically informed by this region, but we are growing it as well in Africa, in Latin America. And as some of you know, we are currently in conversation with ADB and others to have a strong team helping us not only develop and de-risk those portfolio, but look at how we attract private investment, but also public investment through different funding mechanisms. So with this, let me stop here and hand back to you, Rachana. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Yes, the importance of this bringing different stakeholders at all levels together, acknowledging the interconnectedness of SDGs and determining actions together. As you said, identifying leverage points and developing portfolios of integrated solutions, and building new forms of collaboration under whole of society approach, and identifying and mobilizing different sources of finances. I mean, these are all so important. And as you discussed this UNDP Social Innovation Initiative, I'm very pleased to also share in this forum that ADB plans to partner with UNDP in this very important initiative. And as Patrick said, that as a practitioner, we need to join hands and work together to really accelerate this important agenda of localizing SDGs, so that the Agenda 2030 could be achieved. So with this, we have now come to the end of the session 4. I will now hand over to Hiranya Mukhopadhyay. He is the Chief of Governance Thematic Group. So over to you, Hiranya.
Thank you, Rachana. But do we have some time for questions and comments from?
Oh, yeah, that is true. I'm sorry. Yes, yeah, so that's right. I forgot that. So yes,
you can open up for 10-15 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for reminding. Yes, we do have questions and answer, and I could see. Okay, there are no questions at the moment, but maybe then if I could, maybe I can start.
I was trying to say something.
So okay, then you go ahead. Yeah. Okay, you go ahead.
Now, that is why it is driven by my own motive. Anyway, so I thought when I was listening to all the presentations are very good, but when Patrick started talking about functional disconnect between, let me quote from Patrick's presentation, this disconnect between functional assignments and fiscal decentralization. This is extremely critical because I am a public finance expert. Of course, there are issues and problems at the local level also. They don't tap their own resources. They don't bother about mobilizing enough resources, whatever is available to them. But it is equally important to understand that the federal level or the central government level they are also facing acute hard budget constraint. So they are in India, for example. Joy will Joy will support me. Then state after state, they have state finance commissions, where the state finance commissions propose the sharing of revenues between the states and the local government. But the states, many states, they don't implement. Many states, because they themselves are facing hard budget constraints. Now, why they are facing hard budget constraints? Of course, they are facing it because their revenue mobilization effort is equally bad. Their tax efforts are equally bad. There are huge problems with the allocative efficiency of scarce public resources. They don't allocate resources judiciously for public investment programs as subsidies to the SOEs. So what I see that all the 4 sessions we have had since yesterday, the domestic resource mobilization, quality infrastructure investment, infrastructure governance, domestic resource mobilization, SOE reforms, and of course, your session, they are all interlinked. These are not 4 separate initiatives. They are all interlinked. You cannot have good localizing efforts unless you resolve many issues at the federal level also. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Hiranya. So shall I now request Patrick to share your views on this, Patrick?
Sure. Well, thank you very much. And I do, of course, understand, Hiranya, your viewpoint, which is very, very valid. When I was mentioning, of course, the disconnect between the functional assignments and the fiscal decentralization, yes, as an advocate, I would somehow call for additional fiscal transfers. But what is also very important, and you pointed it very well in your question, it's the importance also to providing to the subnational level the capacity to increase their fiscal space, right? And this is something that, I mean, we have Joy here. I'm sure he has a lot of experience here in terms of also subnational fiscal space strategies. But this is something we need to have as well, right? How do we help? How does federal government help local governments increase their fiscal space? I mean, it's also by authority, but it's also by capacity, as Emilia and Joy mentioned also. So let me just stop here because I'm pretty sure my colleagues on the call will have much more to complement. Thank you, Rachana.
Thank you, Patrick. Dr. Eleman, do you have anything to add to this?
Okay, thank you. I mean, I fully agree with Dr. Mukhopadhyay talking about the fiscal scenario in the country and other countries also. But this is exactly the point from where Kerala starts. Kerala actually had a classical decentralization where the 3 Fs, the funds, functionaries, and the functions were transferred to the various tiers of local governments. So that is very important. So we also have a substantially strong State Finance Commission and the actions taken out of the recommendations of the State Finance Commission. So all these things together actually take our local governments move forward for achieving the Agenda 30. One. Second one is, I also agree that this is all linked to a global scenario, the national scenario and the state scenario, and then only we can actually, even for achieving SDGs, they are very important. What the local governments provide is a little bit of convergence, little bit of flexibility, little bit of potentials for intervening. There are also experiences of low cost, no cost interventions. So I would actually conclude by simple sentence what our Chief Minister, Mr. Pinarayi Vijayan, had written in the Economic and Political Weekly last year. See, the experience of this pandemic itself would show that, and it should actually act as a game changer, because the post-pandemic, the COVID pandemic, we need to have a change in all our assessing the role of state versus the market. This is the ideal time to actually look at the role of the state versus the market, and public sector intervention in social and economic sectors cannot be treated as an avoidable evil. We need to actually, because that is what our COVID experience have shown. And empowered states, that is the subnational governments and the local governments, should be equal partners with the center in a cooperative federal setup. Only they together can encourage this change. And I think for achieving SDGs, considering the pandemic experiences, that actually should act as a game changer. And we need to actually really think for the future, and where this role of law, I mean, as you rightly put it in your title for your session, our session, it's about multi-level planning and multi-level governance for achieving SDGs. So this is what my experience from Kerala tells me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eleman. You know, in Amelia's presentation, Amelia, I've noted that, finance and resources also score quite poorly in terms of, the local and regional governments driving forces of innovation. So as we are discussing about finance and resources, I just wonder whether you'd also like to share your views on this. Then we can have take another question in the box. So over to you, Amelia.
Yes, thank you very much. No, I mean, I very much agree that there is that the issue of ensuring that that all spheres of government have the capacity to produce their own revenues, it will be very critical, and they will need to take the responsibility also for these revenues. So we do need to address the capacity of taxation, for instance, in local governments, and for making that happen, right? Not only creating the tax, but also actually collecting the tax, and I think that that's a very, very valid point. On the other hand, I think there needs to be a discussion about the kind of whose responsibility it is to finance certain type of service provision and infrastructure. I think in the kind of complex systems that we are, it is unthinkable to think that there is only one level of government that is responsible for this. This is where the co-governance comes, and where you need to finance long-term soft and hard infrastructure together. It is unthinkable to think that a city is responsible, is the sole responsible for the transportation system, but also for access to internet and to new tech. The role of hubs that local governments play, servicing the rest of the territory, the symbiosis between the rural and the urban, needs to be tackled at different spheres of government. And that brings me to the issue of investment. I think there is an investment that needs to be done with the federal governments, but there is also investment that needs to be done directly into local governments, so that they can shape the type of service provision that we need. And we will need to change the volume of investment that we know up until now. And I agree very much with Patrick that will be critical for the future, and new mechanisms will need to be thought about. There is a question in the chat addressing the issue of what kind of mechanisms do we think are needed, the new mechanisms to coordinate, and it's very related to this. I mean, we need to admit that change is part and parcel of our world right now, and it is rapid change that not only generations will be able to see, but that we see here and now. Change is now something that we perceive as we go. And so if we think that change is part and parcel of what we need to deal with, we will need to also address perspective from different spheres of government together, and we will need to go beyond the vertical and the horizontal coordination to also an intersectoral coordination. I think that will be extremely critical, and it will not be easy because this will need to be combined with adaptability, but it will also need to be combined with agility and ensuring that we can that we can maintain stability. Stability is very important. There cannot be trade-offs. You know, we cannot say either we have this or we have that. Populations will need combinations of decision making. So for us, the territorial coordination is now a new critical component, and I think Patrick, this was part of the localizing exercise that we have been doing with UNDP. Vertical coordination, sectoral coordination, and territorial coordination are critical now for the new types of multi-level modalities that we are looking at, and how you integrate that in what type of coordination mechanism depends on how the different federations or states are designed, but you need to take these three into account, and they need to be agile, they need to be adaptable, and they need to guarantee stability. I think those are the critical principles, and avoiding trades-off will be critical for the stability. You cannot do trades-off like teams versus time management, or experimentations versus risk, or case-by-case evaluation versus longer term and administrative law. So we are in a new period of localization, if I may describe it this way. We are in a new period of governance that will need to be marked by the complex type of emergencies that we are dealing with. So the shape of the mechanism is not that important, but the component of those mechanisms will be, and it will be unavoidable. We will need to review some of the legal frameworks that enable us to do that.
Thank you so much, Amelia. So I also thank everyone, but before I do that, I would like to hand over to Hiranya for concluding this session. Over to you, Hiranya.
Thank you very much, Rachna. It was again a very productive, very interesting and powerful session, just like 3 other sessions we are having since yesterday, including the speech by our Vice President and the keynote speaker. Friends, we are now come to the wrapping up session, and I would like to request the DG Mr. Bruno Carrasco to wrap up the session with a concluding remarks. And I must say that I enjoyed since yesterday all the sessions, beautiful presentations, very interesting ideas, new challenges, new issues. But now Mr. Carrasco will wrap it up. Bruno, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hiranya. Distinguished speakers, panelists, and participants, on behalf of the Asian Development Bank, I'm very pleased to deliver the closing remarks for this year's Governance Forum. Like Hiranya mentioned, I was also extremely impressed with the quality of the whole forum. We had some excellent speakers. We heard from panelists, and I think it tied up very nicely those 4 pillars that we refer to in our governance agenda. Our theme on governance pathways comes at an opportune time as governments in the region face the challenges of establishing post-pandemic green, inclusive, resilient recovery, or GIRR. This challenge, as we heard, is not only unprecedented, but it is also multifaceted, one that requires coordinated responses across various governance themes, sectors, and of course, as we heard in the last session, levels of government. Ladies and gentlemen, the journey towards recovery begins with the basic concept of trust, the trust of citizens that their governments will indeed prioritize their welfare by pursuing decisive and citizen-centric post-pandemic economic programs that really translate into healthier and secure households and improved well-being. However, trust alone whether in governments or in institutions, is not enough, as we've heard. There needs to be greater transparency in the decision-making process. And that is really what holds officials accountable, including to citizens. For that, citizens in turn must have a voice. With this framework in place, a system of checks and balances ends up really underpinning the whole decision-making process and can lead to better development outcomes. Such trust can only be achieved through a holistic approach where public institutions at all levels work closely with each other, the private sector, citizens, and of course, civil society. To ensure focus and sustainability, as we've heard, service delivery programs also need to be framed within the broader context of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, it is for this reason that this year's Governance Forum highlights the importance of establishing an integrated service delivery framework that builds on the quality of infrastructure investments, the role and value of state-owned enterprises, the importance of domestic resource mobilization, and of course, the role of multi-level governments. In this context of scarce resources, this framework is critical to ensuring that progress towards achieving the SDGs remains strong. Now, quickly trying to summarize the 4 sessions, and I don't mean to do justice to the depth and richness in the discussions. Let me just try to put up a few points. The first session on quality infrastructure investment, or QII, has shown that in response to COVID-19, governments launched a large fiscal stimulus response to strengthen health systems, provide safety nets for poor and vulnerable groups, and maintain credit flows in order to restore economic growth. As such, and as discussed in session 1, the quality of infrastructure governance serves as an enabler that directly affects the efficiency of investments and results in the greatest social and economic benefits to society for each unit of investment. We heard about the importance of strengthening the quality of investment, particularly in times where we have limited resources and where we are reaching to an endpoint in terms of the stimulus. Now, this is especially true given the public resources at hand. Applying QII, of course, will enhance the value for money proposition that we discussed of our infrastructure development, and building on concepts, again, that were discussed, such as efficiency, accessibility, and sustainability. A framework was presented that serves to better identify projects that support the green, inclusive, resilient recovery. Turning to the second session on state-owned enterprises, this session showcased their dominant role in many aspects of service delivery, and reflecting the fact that globally SOEs still account for some 55% of infrastructure investments. So they're still a dominant player across many regions. During the COVID-19 pandemic, they have also served as a shock absorber of sorts, as indeed, as we discussed in session 2, their role increased in importance as many of them used their extended balance sheets to temporarily bail out the private sector through fee waivers and other mechanisms. It is with this background that the forum has also explored various SOE reform strategies that can help governments manage the fiscal, financial, and service delivery impact of the global pandemic. SOE reforms, however, need certainly to pick up pace as the recovery sets in and settles on an improved equilibrium path. As part of the process, SOEs in the wake of the pandemic, and referring to an earlier point, should become better managed and more accountable to the general public along the lines of perhaps many of the listed companies. Commercial finance for SOEs will also be important to reduce government debt burdens and avoid an investment crunch. Turning to session 3 on domestic resource mobilization, with large demands on public finances, the other side of the coin of QII, is DRM, domestic resource mobilization. The pandemic response and recovery measures need to be funded largely by government's own revenues, and secondly, through better leveraging of the private sector. As the latter will be challenging over the short term, greater efforts will be required to broaden the revenue base. In this context, the forum focused on compliance risk management, or CRM, which will continue to play an important role in the aftermath of COVID-19. in order to secure efficient revenue collection while minimizing taxpayers' compliance burden. The session also highlighted that the application of data technologies, such as data analytics, will be a key driver in addressing emerging challenges and promoting compliance. Governments will need to build public trust and confidence in the fiscal contract by demonstrating that tax burdens are applied progressively, distributed fairly and equally, and lead to visible benefits to all. The concept of CRM is much broader than simply selection of cases for audit. As ways to improve compliance, governments need to facilitate upstream interventions through a compliance improvement plan, as demonstrated, for example, in the Singapore presentation. Finally, on session 4, which we just concluded, on multi-level governance and localizing the SDGs, we recognize the importance of strengthening public service delivery mechanisms at all levels. We heard from yesterday, Vice President Susan Tono stressing that through the Sustainable Development Goals, this is the most important development commitment countries worldwide have made. And unfortunately, there are signs that certainly the Asia-Pacific region, perhaps beyond, is falling behind. As part of the solution, as was underscored by one of the presenters in session 4, we have to identify the leverage points to have greater multiplier effects from operations and ensure greater interconnectedness across the SDGs. Subnational governments also need to play their part, as we've seen in the areas of health and education that tend to form part of the delegated expenditure responsibilities to subnational governments. We've explored the transformative actions in multi-level governance systems to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs, especially at the time of complex emergencies that we've just lived in the COVID area and post-COVID era to come. Expanding and deepening ADB's collaboration in these areas with our DMCs and our partners will be of critical importance if we are to quicken the pace of support for the SDGs. Key messages that we also heard in session 4 included that 60% plus contributions of subnational governments to the SDGs and how to ensure the stability of strong public institutions. Finally, in building towards an integrated and whole of society approach to the green, inclusive, resilient recovery, post-pandemic economy, we also need to complement service delivery programs with measures to strengthen public financial management, procurement, and integrity. As Professor Mukherjee reminded us yesterday, we need to develop reliable information systems to combat the 3 C problems of corruption, capture, and clientelism. In closing, I would like to thank all our speakers, panel members, and moderators who shared with us their valuable time, their learning, and experiences. A very special thanks to Vice President Susan Tono, Xia Hongyang, Hiranya Mukhopadhyay, and the governance team, Hanif, David Go, Daisuke, Rachana, Ali, Tony, and many others who I owe special gratitude to. I would like to thank also all our participants for making this event a success. Thank you very much, and I now bring this governance forum to a close.
Thank you very much. And Ali, can we have a quick photo, because Bruno is around here now? Ali,
Yes, of
Tony.
course. Yes, of course.
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Please request
ask
everybody to switch on your camera.
Zoe, may we request assistance, please, for the photo?
Okay, so everyone just turn on your videos and your cameras, please, and just look straight at the camera when, okay, there you go. Okay, all good. Taking the photo now in 1, please look at the camera. 1, 2, 3. Okay, again, just one more. 1, 2, 3.